Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by The Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Hey, well, welcome to this late night edition of the Mrs. R Relevant Podcast. And I guess it's late night for me because I'm on the East Coast, but like Parker, you just like finished dinner, right?
Yeah, no, I actually pushed it back a little bit. We're just watching a movie, hanging out, just waiting for it to start. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Cool. Drew, how are you doing today?
Pretty great. Just got done grinding some Caleb Johnson film. Just got that scouting report posted, so I'm ready to go.
What a watch.
Yeah, Drew is chomping at the bit to do a running back episode now.
How can you not be with this running back class? How can you not be?
Cool. Well, we have something pretty unique today. We are going to talk about shadow teams, and like shadow teams is like Christmas for Parker.
It's what I live for, man. I love the whole concept and like the different ways you're able to attack it, and it's everything. But I'll just get started, and I'll just run through kind of like what it is, how to get started in one, and then I'll just field questions because I don't necessarily know. I don't want to get too into the weeds without answering the high level questions. But essentially, a shadow team is just like my favorite way, at least, of not only like testing out my evaluation process and like how I see players and how my board lines up, but like just being able to keep up with prospects. Like I found myself after my first couple of years where like making boards where I'd like guys I'd have my guys, I'd have my sleepers, my gems. But then like 2 years later, I'm like, oh, I should like go back and check on these. Like, who did I like in this class? Maybe it's just my memory, but I was always going back and then trying to I don't want to run all 300, 250 names through, Google and look everybody up. Some of them are maybe out of the league. You never know what goes on. What team is everybody on? How are they doing? Are they getting any reps? And then it's kind of like, oh, okay. And then you move on and forget it instantly. But a shadow team, you go through and you actually, depending on how you do your draft, you can do it a lot of different ways again. But for me, I evaluate all my guys. I build my own personal big board using the methods that I think are effective. And then what you do is through the first few years, well, essentially what you're doing is just building an NFL roster. You're building a 53-man roster with a practice squad. And you're building it exclusively through the draft. So you're not like able to utilize free agency in the offseason. You're not going in and making trades for players. You're drafting guys, getting them on your roster, and then hoping that they pan out. And over time, as you get more players, you get players every year. You got to make cuts. You got to decide, who your starters are. It's as involved as you want it to be. And I'll go into more detail later about like how I kind of keep up with it in season. But yeah, that's kind of the premise is you're just building an NFL team from the draft, testing your draft skills. That's how I looked at it when I started. And then I just, again, like the added bonus of it just gives me a way to like, if I can like scoop up my guys or comparing guys to guys maybe I had higher than them over the years. This is just a great way to follow up with the guys that hopefully you liked because you drafted them and you had to compete against the real NFL drafts, which is where I'll start. So there's a bunch of different ways to set it up, but the way that I'm doing it is you get 2 picks per round of the real draft through your first 4 seasons. And so the kind of range of picks that you get to choose from, I guess, or I roll dice because it's out of 6 picks. So I roll a die for each of my pick ranges, and that tells me which pick I have in that range. And then I set up my board, and that's what I roll with. But, that range slides down every year through the first 4 years. So like the first year you have picks 1 through 6. So you roll your die or do your random number generator, and you pick a number 1 through 6 for that first pick. And that's where you land. And so I got the 5th pick. So the second worst option, one might say, for your starting draft, especially in that quarterback class was a couple years ago. So really would have liked an early pick because there was like the big 3. But anyway, then it's the next section of picks is another group of 6 picks. So you roll a die again, and you're picking that range. And so that slots you in the draft. And I know the number of picks per round vary, but so I just did, out of the first 6 picks of each round, I did the 5th pick. And then out of I think it's the next range was like 17 to 23 or whatever. I picked the whatever in that order per round. So you're not like picking out the back end of some of the longer rounds where you have like, the 40, 50 picks in a round with all the comp picks and whatnot. But anyway, that's how you kind of get your draft selection. And then what I'm doing is after the drafts, after my 14 selections, and let me know like if this gets too confusing to the two of you.
Yeah, we don't have any charts. We didn't make any charts. So this is just going to be people listening to us.
Yeah.
So far what I've got is you're going to pick 2 picks per round, which means that your first year you get to draft 14 players.
Yeah, through your first 4 draft cycles, you pick 14 players in the draft. And then what I'm doing with my team, and there's a ton of different ways people have done them so far, just because it's kind of niche, and so there wasn't really a set rule set. But I'm doing 8 UDFA, so I get my 14 picks, then 8 players, which, if you do math, is 22 players a season for your first 4 years, and that's 11 guys on each side of the ball if you split it that way, which I have not. But yeah, you get 22 guys a year essentially doing that method through your first 4 seasons. That's 8 guys over the first 4 drafts that you have. That's enough to sort through to get a 53-man roster. And I believe the NFL number is 16 for the practice squad. So total, I'm going to have 69 guys on my team, including practice squad and the 53. So that's just kind of how your roster construction goes. You pick those 14 guys in the draft, and you pick by following along with the draft. So I always like, my draft night party with me and my wife, the 2 of us watching together. And I'm usually at practice for the first half, but I go along, you follow along with the draft, and then when your pick is up, so when I had the 5th pick in my first year, the goal is to select your guy before the actual pick happens, at least in the first round or first 3 rounds if you're me. Just because those are a little easier to follow along with, and you obviously don't want to like spoil it and be like, oh, my guy's falling, I'll just wait until he goes and pick him, then say I just picked him. It's all the honor system, but if you're a purist like I am, you're following along, at least for the first couple of days, because day 3 gets long, and I just kind of go back through it. I start at the top, and I just watch it. I read it through until my pick, then I make my pick, then I keep reading. But anyway, that's how you draft. You just literally just following along. So if your player is available, obviously you can pick him. If he's been selected in the draft, you can't pick him. So you have to follow the actual draft. And that's why I kind of like that concept, because it's all about going through and, I would take this guy in this round, or I take this guy in that round. You get to see how realistic that is, because you get to go into a draft. Maybe you have a guy that you have a 3rd round grade on that you're hoping is kind of an end of day 2 steal, but then he goes in the first round. It's like, oh, well, you can't get that guy anymore. And so the fun conversations I run into every year is like, oh, I love that guy, and I wish, I could have had him on my team. And then, the rebuke is always, well, you didn't love him that much, or he'd be on your team because you would have selected him when he was available. So it's kind of always a fun way to reflect. But yeah, that's kind of like the premise of building your team. And then obviously I have a spreadsheet built out. So you put it in, you put your players in, and when you drafted him, that way you can always look back and say, oh, I took him. Like I took Ivan Pace in the 6th round. He was a UDFA. But it's always fun to track some of that stuff. I always put where that had him on my board as well, so I can go back and be like, oh yeah, I had this guy ranked here, and I got him all the way down here. Like I've said on previous shows, I believe, like I picked up top 100 guys as UDFAs in years past, where I just really liked a guy that just ended up sliding for whatever reason. But it's always funny kind of getting to the back end. Like I don't think I've really ever drafted outside of my top 100, top 150, through the 7 rounds, just because there ends up being guys that you're really high on that the NFL obviously isn't, or end up sliding or what have you. And then it's always fun going to UDFA because you have your 14 picks that like you're like, oh, I'm going for X position, or had these guys I really liked. But then you're presented this pool of players that you're like, I had all these guys graded, they didn't get drafted. I want them on my team, but I only get 8. That's why I limit myself to that, because it's like, oh, like last year I picked up a punter, and I picked there was another weird position. I think I picked up another edge when I didn't need an edge, and neither of them. I think the punter's a free agent right now, and the edge I think is a practice squad guy. But anyway, it's just kind of like, what guys you take, which UDFAs end up like breaking out, but you didn't see them, but you could have had them because they were UDFA. Anyway, it's kind of like the whole, again, reflective on why I like it. But the team building aspect is like a whole other side of it, and that's another fun part. But that's kind of more, there's different areas of that. But that's kind of the premise. You go through the draft, you pick your 22 guys a year for 4 years, then after that, it goes down to 1 pick per round. But I'll keep 8 free agents, so I'll be getting 15 players a year instead of 22, and then just carry on. There's a bunch of different ways to carry on once you hit kind of like full team status, but still working on that for now.
So, Drew, what do you think?
It sounds like something that's really for the sickos out there, which sounds awesome to me. That's right up my alley. Just for people that obviously are huge draft fanatics like we are, but just football fanatics in general. Is there like a software that you do all this on, or do you just chart it on your own, like on a Google Sheet or whatever?
No,
like
yeah. So
software for it.
I have a Google Sheet built out with a few tabs. It's kind of fun because every year when I get into it, I'm like, oh, well, I want to add this piece, but if I add it now, I got to add it for previous year. So it's like every year it's kind of turns into its own mini project, which is fun.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of in that dead month of the summer when there's no sports going on. It's kind of fun to have like a little project to work on for me and look back at things and look ahead and whatnot. But so I have a sheet built out, like I said. So I have a section where it's all my draft. I call my draft cards, but it's just all my selections, what pick I selected them in which round and which year, who are my UDFAs. And I always keep my UDFAs in order that I added them. I don't know if it's just a thing for me, but it's always like I kind of like knowing like who are my high priority free agents, and then who are the guys I kind of picked up at the tail end, or I wanted to make sure made it on. But I keep those cards, and then I have a team. I can actually, let me see if I can share my screen and I'll show you my sheet.
And then while you're trying to find all that, so I'm going to repeat what I think I heard, but correct anything that I misstate. So you build a team. Does the team compete with another team? Like, are people putting these things in Madden?
So there's multiple ways to do it. So a lot of people, once they get through the first few years to pick their like draft position, they'll input their team into Madden, like make a team with them. And usually it's guys like are just like, oh, this team had the most amount of players that were on my team. It's the easiest transition, but there's a lot of ways. But anyway, they input all of their teams. So they take all the time to like replace all the players on the roster and whatnot and have all that happen. And then they run like a franchise, like they simulate it in the franchise mode. So it goes through a whole season. They don't play the games. They just simulate it to see how their team does. And so there's some guys whose like whole MO, and the reason they do it is to go win a Madden Super Bowl, because it's like, oh, hey, if I can make a Super Bowl winning team, and then, however they finish is a more realistic gauge of like, oh, this is where we'd pick. And then, they kind of go on and pick in that slot, or they'll take those teams, draft picks, whoever it might be. And then if they get traded or whatever, they have to stick by those trades. And there's a lot of fun things you can do from that. But they're kind of just living in the Madden realm. There's some guys that don't even really love watching prospects, but they like team building. And so they'll use like online boards or do stuff kind of like what Jim does as far as engaging with draft content creators and like figure out what players they like. And then they'll go add those players to their team in the draft, and then they'll sim. And like, there's a lot of like kind of, that's where it's like, you don't really have to be a sicko. You just have to like some aspect of this to invest the time that it takes, because you do have to do the draft. And then the Madden guys, they're building the roster, the draft evaluators, they're watching the film, like just kind of like pick where you want to allocate your time. But then there's also, I got added, not to cut you off, but just the other side of it that I've seen is there's a fantasy style league that we're in, a few of us that we're trying to grow. At least I'm trying to grow. It's super cool, and we score the teams every week. It's using PFF's all 22 fantasy model, where like as far as scoring and everything. So it's your PFF grade multiplied by like your positional value, and that gives you your score for the week, or player score for the week. that's kind of a better gauge for some people to be like, oh, that's how my player is doing in the real world, not like in Madden where it can get weird or some things might just happen. But that's kind of like the other side of it, where it's like the more using the PFF grades and such, or just, relying on Madden. But
well, if we make a strong enough push to Woody Johnson, we could have a Shadow Team League, and then the winner of the Shadow Team League becomes GM of the Jets.
Dude, I'm telling you, if there was just like a 1-year contract thing where I was like, hey, the winner just gets to GM it for a season and then see what happens.
Hey, Jacksonville, it's a week away from the combine, and Jacksonville still does not have an active general manager. So, I mean, if they're looking at shadow teams, I mean, we got some talent.
Just type it into the Twitter machine. Go find a GM.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Parker, you've partially answered what was going to be my next question, which was, does a shadow team compete with other teams? So you do have a way to score them and have a league.
Yeah.
And I know, like, offline many months ago, you had mentioned, okay, you were looking for a simulator to do it. And hey, oh, by the way, I have a draft simulator, but I would need to program it to do shadow teams. Right.
Yeah, and that's where it gets kind of weird, because you can have the same player on multiple teams, because we try to leave it open. Like, everyone does their own draft. That way you're not competing against a bunch of different, like 100 different draft guys, or you're just
right.
competing like if you were a GM. And so it's funny to like go through some of the teams. Like, you see multiple teams with like a Lamar Jackson or a Joe Burrow because they got that pick, or there's a few with Caleb Williams now. And like the same thing goes with multiple other positions. Obviously, like you can tell who the draft community liked and then who was kind of like a true sleeper, and it's kind of funny that way. But yeah, it's that the weird, I guess you could say, part of it. It's not like normal fantasy football where you can have multiple teams with the same players, but it's just all about like, oh, obviously we all like that player, but then if that player busts, it's like, oh, you all missed on that player.
But like, it's interesting, right? Because obviously I'm a software guy by day and then a draft guy by night, right? So all like the exclusive part of picking a player is something that's covered with like everything I do in my simulator. Meaning the developers ask me, if the player's picked, can another team pick it? For a shadow team, the answer is yes. When normally for like a mock draft, the answer is no. For draft a team, the answer is no. So it's just flipping what that switch is.
And that's the unique part of like where the only time it matters is like the actual draft, but then like it's almost like the one draft position. It's not necessarily null and void because a player still goes there and gets removed from the board, but it's not necessarily, it's like that pick, you might be removing technically 2 people from the board because you're not going to draft your player again, but then another player could also go off the board. So it's like, I think that aspect would be tough, but like as far as like the mock drafts and stuff where it's like kind of the struggle with doing that, it's like hard to do a shadow team mock because you go into a draft simulator. It's like, yeah, the teams can be pretty standard with their picks throughout the way. So it's like if you have like the 5th and 18th pick, you can go through and select those, but that's not going to line up with where you're actually going to be drafting throughout the rest of the draft unless you do it that way. But that's where it's like kind of like that aspect would be nice too, to have a simulator where it's I can just input my picks and then have the simulator just go. And then that gives me a better gauge on how I'm picking instead of picking for 3 different teams or doing the trades and I literally, my sole goal for the shadow teamism right now is like, I want to get not only like doing like our Friday version where we can get 32 guys in and do a full mock draft, but I'd love to do like a like stereotypical fantasy draft and get like a board and do like a live event and have like, we all put our own picks on there and we all pick in the different draft slots. I think that'd be awesome. Like, I feel like the concepts you can do with it are crazy, but it's all
that
about
sounds sick. Yeah,
because it's not necessarily team specific anymore. It's your team, so it's like we can just put your name in draft slots, and hopefully the fantasy league gets big enough and we can pull that off.
So Vlox, thanks for listening. I want you to put in 3 or 4 sentences into the chat for what you mean here, and while you're doing that, so again, Parker, I have a draft simulator, and we've briefly talked. Okay. So the first thing I would say is check out Fanatic mode on my simulator. My simulator works best from a PC. So if you have a tablet or you try it on mobile, may not be so good right now. The mobile part should be fixed next year, but try Fanatic mode. Here is my challenge. is getting the NFL draft order. Let me rephrase that. Getting the NFL draft picks into my simulator. Right? Because right now, every draft is simulated. I don't come in and say Abdul Carter went first overall to Tennessee. Like literally the day of the draft, I just delete the player database and import a new one. Like I'm not like I know like with some of the other simulators, you can go in and after day one, you can do a round 2 and 3 mock draft.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't worry about that with mine. Like I literally just delete the player database. I'm like, there's 2 or 3 days. Everybody can use somebody else's simulator. Right? That's just
For sure.
And then the second thing is that during the NFL draft, the draft order changes.
Mhm.
Right? Because there's more draft day trades. Right? So I won't like the amount of time it takes me to modify my draft order is not trivial. Right? So like that's usually for me to update a 7-round draft order. It's like a 2 to 4 hour investment of me.
Mhm.
So I have to be able to somehow wrap my head around, does the order, let me rephrase it, does the team the player went to matter? I don't think so.
Well, I think as far as tracking your own personal draft, no, because
Exactly.
theoretically you really only care if they're available or not, and then where they're at.
Yes. That was where I was going with that.
Yeah.
So I have to come up with a way to feed my simulator the draft order of the players so that fans could come in and do a shadow team. Because let's say, I'm going to say that there's 2 types of people that will make a shadow team. One type is going to be the hardcore people, and those people are the ones that are on the podcast. Right? That's the 3 of us and the people that are very similar to us that we know that are draft professors or really similar. And even if they're not draft professors, they're the Ryan Sparks of the world who pretty much just know what's going on, right?
Mhm.
But then to bring this to the masses, right? So like if I add it to the simulator, I'm bringing it to the masses. So the masses may not know who got taken in the 3rd round.
Mhm.
I'm just saying. They may know who their team took in round 1, but do they know who every team took in round 3?
Well, that's the thing too, where it's like, I mean, the biggest pain for me is like I said, I try and do my best. I'm pretty good about following along through the first 3 rounds. But once it gets to day 3, it's like I'm like, oh, I'll just check. If I check throughout the day, or if like I'm watching it because I'm not doing anything, I'll follow along. But like usually it's like at the end of the night, I sit down and I'm like, okay, let's pull up NFL.com and pull up the draft results and then go name by name. And then not only do I check it off on their board, but I got to cross them out on my board. And I'm like back and forth. Like if I could just have something, not only to like just even store like my draft data, but just like be able to pull it up and be like, hey, time to do my day 3 draft. And then I just run through and without even like looking at anything, just burn through it. That'd make it so much nicer for sure. It's not necessarily about the team accuracy. I just want to get my draft done.
Yeah.
So like I can load. How could I do it? So if you guys talk for a second, I'm gonna go look for a second.
Yeah,
he's going down the rabbit hole. He's gone.
Oh, he's locked in already. Yeah, I'm sure I cannot imagine the logistical nightmare of trying to get the NFL draft order into something like that. But as far as like the competition between the shadow teams, the PFF like all 22 fantasy thing you were talking about seems like a really good way to do it. I assume that's adjusted for like minimum snap counts and stuff, right?
Yeah, so I can actually run through if I can find that sheet. Oh, there it is. So I can talk about value and then the snap counts, kind of the scoring principles, right? So with the positions first and foremost, so they're broken down like there's 10 positions, like standard positions per team, and obviously you can change about like the number of like D tackles you're using, or there's kind of a 11th flex player on each side of the ball. So every position has its standard value, but then the 11th player, the 11th qualifying player per snaps that has the highest PFF grade for the week is who gets scored as your 11th player on that side of the ball. And so that can be for offense, a running back, tight end, wide receiver; for defense, like a defensive lineman, a corner, a linebacker, safety, like just DB, like, just kind of that, like whether you're running, a rotational D lineman or you're running 2 tight ends or 2 running back by committee. Like that's kind of how you can think about sorting it out that way. Just kind of, again, that weird extra guy that changes per team. But the minimum snap counts, I think for most is just 30 as a baseline. Like you have to have 30 snaps in a game to be eligible to be scored. The only differences to that are running back is 20, tight end is 25. The interior defensive line is 20, edges are 25. And then that extra qualifying player to qualify as the 11th person, the rotational player, you only have to have 20 snaps to be eligible to be graded or scored.
Okay.
So if that all makes sense. And then they all have their values. So again, it's that PFF grade times a percentage. So it's like quarterbacks, for example. Quarterback, their positional value per the PFF model is 10.87%. That gets broken down into they get a possible total of, I think it's 10 points mathematically. Let me make sure that's true. Yeah, so that 10.87% equates to 10.87 maximum points per week for that player. And then the next highest, I think, is receiver at 6.04 total points per week, and then it kind of just scales down. And then it is broken up all 3 offensive line positions, and then defensive, interior, and edge. And we do handle, kind of grading those flex players where it's like a guard center, where maybe you drafted him as a guard, but he's playing center. You drafted him as a tackle or a guard, and he's playing the other. We go back a few years, and if they have a qualifying snaps at that position for 3-year history, it's in there somewhere. You can still consider them a flex player, but as they get out of that, they have to move to their true position for scoring purposes. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the only weird thing we've run into with that. But yeah, and then it even like kickers, punters, long snappers, they all have grades too. If you want to include them in your team or just not, I mean, that's again a personal choice. Like I said, I took a swing on a punter, and I'm not doing that again for a very long time. And it was just a UDFA guy. So, but yeah, that's kind of just how the scoring works.
Yep. Yes, it sounds like anybody in the Shadow Teams needs to pay attention to that podcast from last week that we did, because that sounds like a bad class to be taking some offensive linemen for in this. If there's that much, like you're kind of walking on eggshells with guys that are going to switch in between guard and tackle.
Well, that's the thing. Like they can still qualify, and like you can actually, like, the guard tackles are nice because tackles are more valuable, so they have a higher point total. Mm-hmm. So like if you have a guy that maybe, I'm trying to think of a good example. I'm blanking right now, which is crazy. But if you have like a tackle that got bumped into guard's worth less, but that guy technically has tackle on his track record, so he can be a tackle for you for like I think it's like 3 seasons before you have to. Okay, he's a guard. So as long as it's in that 3-year history, like playing history, he's still eligible to be a swing guy.
Okay.
But then, yeah, as he becomes like, oh, he's a guard, you should know that by now, and you can go get a tackle, or vice versa. But yeah, same thing goes with like linebacker, edge guys, or like the Cooper DeJeans, where it's like, is he a safety? Is he a corner? I'll just get him and see where he lands. So
yeah. And now I'm sure while Jim is still finishing all that, the biggest question I have is, do we get to see Coach Parker's team at all today?
Yeah, I got it right here. I can share it.
The roster? I got to see the roster.
We'll see if this works for me.
Yeah, finding things on my hard drive is becoming more and more difficult. I have to learn to do my own bookkeeping.
Hey, we've all been there. At least I have. The spreadsheets I have.
So,
I can't imagine what it looks like for a coder.
One comment I'll add to what's in the chat.
There she is.
Velox, like Parker said, players being picked is an exclusive. So whatever gets deployed the first time has to work for everyone. I can't do like a specific program for just one league unless people are willing to foot the bill for the programming, right? So like if I'm doing it, I have to do something that everybody will be able to use, because if no other simulator has it, the only one people will come to is mine, which is good. but then it has to be something that works without a lot of exceptions. Because here would be an example, like Fanatic Mode just got deployed on my simulator within the last week. Okay, well, Fanatic Mode is basically a lot of exceptions to mock drafting. So it's a mock draft, but there's a lot of rules. So the initial mock draft had been working for 3 years, but it took my developer the better part. They've been working on it since Christmas, and they just released it halfway through February. So basically it took my developer like 8 weeks to just deal with all the exceptions I was giving her. So anything I give my developers, it has to be, here's a set of rules and we're not going to deviate from these. And then if people are willing to use the simulator more, then I would expand to where, okay, if you want this special rule for your league, I'm willing to add some extra rules.
Well, and that's where I think it's great. Like the concept is great, but that's where, I mean, I'm splitting my team into like 2 parallel teams. Once I'm through my first 4 years, when contracts get real for my players, because I'm going to actually also run a separate team that's not necessarily in the league, the fantasy league, but just trying to abide by like salary cap rules with the contracts. I have to use the actual contracts that players get and kind of test out managing the cap from a roster management perspective. And so I think, if we were able to get the league to a spot where we can start trimming, like I have a couple ideas as far as if it grows enough, but getting like groups of 32 to run leagues together, I think we can host those drafts independently. And honestly, we could probably restart it and have everybody, or just kind of phase it out depending on the best way to go, but kind of have that be a separate team. That way we can run like a 32 team where it's all independent, but people can still have their own, I don't want to take their shadow teams away from people that want to participate in like a stricter league like that, dynasty style. But like, I know at least me personally, I don't want to lose my team, like in like kind of the being able to take my guys in every round. So I think having the separate team for a more strict league, like dynasty league, would be really fun doing it that way. I think it would just kind of take some tinkering or adjusting, for those first couple years to get everybody kind of on the same page. I think a true fantasy format where you're having like a 32 team draft and everything like that, where you're kind of running your own mini NFL, would require kind of a more individualized team where it is more specific and every team has its own players. And maybe we can even work in free agency or trades into a league like that as well. That could be really fun down the road if we grow big enough. But I do love the idea. And I see your point, but that's kind of the pro and con to it.
Yeah, and I found my file. It took me long enough, but I found my file. But yeah, there we go. Oh, I can almost read that. I don't know about the rest of the world.
Let's do this. Let's get really in there, and then we'll just go section by section.
Yeah, this is way better, and I'm.
But you can see that I am in fact in QB purgatory. It is the running joke
Michael
of my
Pratt,
team.
QB1.
Took 2 swings last year. Big investment year for Parker.
Is that Birmingham Stallion legend Sam Harton?
It sure is. It sure is.
I got the Stallion shirt on right here.
Yeah, you do. Go Hartman. Pretty boy for the win. But yeah, so this is kind of my sheet. I keep everything in here, but this is just my team sheet. And like you saw, I'll zoom it back and we'll zoom it back in. But just so I can talk about what everything is first. So as you can see, so I keep my draft history on the left. And so the top box is my last year's draft. The one underneath it is the year before. And then the box in the middle with all the colors is my offense. The box to the right is my defense. And then I'll zoom in and we can go over kind of like the stuff that I'm tracking in there, which these are not updated. I don't think they might be. The only thing that might not be updated is just my playoff guys. But yeah, this is my draft history. If you want to screenshot that and roast me for it, it's great.
I saw Troy Franklin in a second.
Yeah, 54, baby. And then every round he slid, I was like, man, that is aging like milk in front of my eyes. And he hasn't even stepped on a field yet. But yeah, so just running through. So yeah, my round, my pick, what pick in the draft they were, the player name, the school, the position, just all the basic info, and then my UDFAs below. And then sliding over, I don't really worry about the positions that much, just kind of like a placeholder, but technically the highlighted ones are supposed to be like your solid starters, I believe is how it's set up. But anyway, so I have, position, player name, the team that they're currently on, hopefully. It's kind of a pain to keep up with that part sometimes. When I picked them, what year I picked them, and then we'll talk about tiers in a second, but kind of their tier ranking. Their PFF grade, this is for the season, their total snap count, and then I always keep track of the Madden grade. A lot of guys do it for the Madden sim. I just do it because I think it's interesting because sometimes they really line up with PFF and sometimes they do not, which is fun for me. And then this kind of column I have in the middle is their average snaps per week. Because again, it's not a per game thing as far as I guess it is for qualifying week to week. But for me, I want to see like which guys are averaging qualifying level snaps. So even if they end up with as a limited information tier, I can kind of see like, oh, this guy's projecting maybe just came on late in the year. And so he's projecting to actually get a starter role next year. It's kind of like for me to be like, what are the guys that actually need to like look at replacing because they're just not getting run versus the guys that, they just might have been in a more limited role or they're just a rotational wide receiver like we're looking at right now or any of that stuff. But yeah, so you can kind of see like I feel like Warren McClendon averaged 15.6 snaps a game, but he started in like 4 games. He just didn't start the other games. He just kind of got reps here and there. So for me, it's kind of like that's a weird number for an offensive lineman. Maybe he's going to have a more expanded role next year. Maybe there was injuries, so look into that. But yeah, that's
kind of the for a second.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so I've looked at developing other things, which would be using some of the data that you're talking about. Okay. So here's the challenge. Like to get that data to come over, it's not free.
Oh yeah.
I would get, for example, PFF has APIs. Mm-hmm. If you plug into the PFF API, I could pull the data into my site, but I have to pay for it. So the question is, does a simulator need to help you with the draft? Or does the simulator need to help you with the draft and the tracking of the team?
Well, that's where I wonder, because this is more like I don't even know how many people go this in depth as far as tracking their team. I know a lot of guys are kind of like you draft it and then you go in, after the Super Bowl or before the draft, the next cycle, and you just enter in all the info from the year before, evaluate it, move on. So I don't even know if the data is that necessary. Like for the league, obviously we follow it every week. But I think if you're building something where it's like you can execute the draft here, you can have mock drafts here, and even if you provided like a team storage where it at least just lists out your team by position, maybe not even any certain order, but it just you can have the names all available. I think that's the biggest thing for people where it's just like, oh, what players do I care about? Oh, that guy's on my team, or like they're able to reference it more. I don't think they need the full layout, and if they do, it's easy to just if you have access and you want that info, you can pull it in. It's super easy to pull up. It is time consuming, but if you're looking to do that, I can only assume you're willing to invest the time because the people that I know that want that info have gotten it. So I don't know if like all of the other info is that relevant unless you actually are looking into that. But like a Madden guy is not really going to care. They just want the name so they can go put them on their team and sim it. So
right. So and I think you and I spoke about that before because keeping track of the draft is one contribution. Mm-hmm. And then keeping track of the team once it's drafted is a second facet of the endeavor. Yeah, and I guess I'll just pause there. My mind is racing, but I don't want the podcast to be listening to my mind race.
No, it's good. And that's where it's like, I feel like everyone I talk to, they have different questions, perspectives, opinions, thoughts, like on it. Like Velox even said in the chat, like there's guys and like even the way people have set up their teams is different. Like I know guys that, like he was saying, the rules he's using, they just draft 16, 17 each round. And that's the 2 guys they get. And like, there's me who I take the dice approach. I know guys that they pick with their favorite team. So they pick wherever their team is picking in each round. Sometimes that means once, sometimes that means twice. But then some of those guys go in and they just pick enough free agents every year in UDFA period to fill up their roster. Like I know guys that picked up 40 plus guys in free agency after this last draft to fill out their team. And they'll do that. They'll pick up as many free agents as they want every year. And then they'll just trim it down. And so like there's as far as like organizing the team, there's a lot of variability, and that's why I think again, getting a 32 player full league to run, you could have standardized rules about team building that everybody's kind of on the same plane. Like even right now in the fantasy league, there's all those different team construction methods. So it's like, hey, that guy has so and so. I would love to have so and so, but I couldn't get him because of XYZ. Like I only got 8 UDFAs. There's a bunch of UDFAs I wanted, but I only got 8 of them. Some guys just picked up whoever they felt like picking up. So I mean, it's kind of that variability. I think it makes the roster management aspect of it hard. But if it's just getting like collecting the names through a draft method and then having that available for people, I think that'd be plenty for especially someone just trying to get started. And then even the UDFAs, if they're going deep enough to get UDFAs, they can keep those names on a note in their phone, you know, as far as I'm concerned with it, as far as you have somewhere to track it.
Yep.
Drew,
And
do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I have some thoughts about the offensive line for Parker's team.
Me too.
Of all people.
Me too.
Yeah,
Me too.
Frank Crum, Jalen Duncan, and Chandler Zavala is an interesting.
Hey,
group.
take a gander over that defensive line. You'll be even more disappointed. It's been tough.
Also, playing off of that, do we also get some insight onto who you're targeting this draft for your shadow team?
I'll talk about
Any-
positions. I do have my draft board. I'm not pulling it up because that's a whole.
Oh, you got to
thing.
keep that on the down low. Yeah, of course.
It's not my actual draft board. I actually have a team adjusted one. So I have my rankings that I drop in and then I adjust it.
okay.
So it's more of like a realistic. I'm not just going BPA on my board.
I like that.
But I mean, for now I am because I have 44 people on my roster. So I'm just getting good football players. But for the future, I've been kind of building it out so I can address needs. Anyway, but yeah, so obviously quarterback's always on the mind. I feel like the last year and this year, I've come in with targets in mind. And last year it just didn't work out. Like I was a huge Knicks guy. You can look it up on my Twitter. I was a huge Knicks fan. When I watched him live when I had the opportunity, was hoping to get him on my team, especially with Franklin. I was like, dude, I'm going to have like the Oregon version of Burrow Chase. This is going to be awesome. And then he went, I was going to pick, because I had the 17th pick, I believe, last year. So I was going to take him at 17. I kept telling myself I'd wait till the second round. I feel like I'm going to do the same thing with Dart this year, but that's a different conversation. I was like, I'll wait till the second round. And that's where it's fun because it's like I'm drafting. Like I can't just say I'll take him in the second round. I have to hope he makes it there.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like
it's Will Howard. No, this is the year. Will Howard. Josh. So Josh had Will Howard as QB2 last night.
Hey, listen, Max Brosmer. Keep Max Brosmer in mind, okay? I've been preaching that dude for a minute.
Well, you see, like I picked a quarter. I had no quarterback on my team going into the draft last year. I didn't take a quarterback until round 5, and it was Michael Pratt, who I just like. I feel like he shouldn't be available right now. I'll take him. And then I took Sam Hartman as a UDFA. I almost drafted him with my last pick in the draft, but I didn't, and I was glad I didn't because I got him as UDFA. But yeah, it's just like kind of coming in this year. I'm like, oh, I'd love to get Dart. It's the same thing with Knicks. I'm like, I'd love to take him. I'll take him with my first pick in the second round if he's there. I will take him. I'll take him at. I haven't rolled. Maybe we should roll tonight. But I'll take him at my first
live
pick.
Live on podcast.
Live on the pod. But I'll take him in my very first pick of the second round. But then like the more I sit here thinking about it, I see the articles coming out. I see people like getting hyped up on him. I already really liked him. I'm like, oh, I don't know. I could take him with that second pick, like in the first. You know, I don't have to take him at 7 or whatever, but I could take him at the second pick. So I don't know. It's kind of like that's why it's fun for me because like it makes the draft more like you can not necessarily relate because my job of worth $1 million a year isn't on the line, but it's fun for me to be like, oh, like I wonder, like this is how these conversations go, where it's like, oh yeah, I have this guy like on my board. If I'm going BPA, I should just take him. That's an easy pick. He's way great value for me per my board right now. But I also need a quarterback, so that's where it's kind of fun for me. But like I said, I'm planning as of right now. I am planning on trying to grab both Dart and Milrow because I think I can get both on day 2. And I'm realistically expecting to have neither quarterback coming out of this draft. So that's where I'm at right now. My focus right now is defensive line. So let's get into it. I actually need to do this recap for my YouTube channel, but we'll do it on this one instead. We won't go too deep though. But so anyway, quarterback, it's a problem. That's my plan for the year at quarterback. We'll see if it happens. Running back, I feel good with Bijan. I'd like to get a second, like especially in a class I really like running backs. I'd like to get a second running back in there, but obviously not a need. But if there's one there at good value, I'm not afraid to take one because having Bijan, like I keep joking with my buddies. I'm like, oh, I'll just take Gene with my first pick, and then I'll have Bijan and Gene, and we'll just carry on with life. We don't. That's all we need.
Yeah, you don't need to
keep if they have a bye week, the other one will score. If they both play in the week, I get the best score. Like this is a win-win.
Get some old school like Ricky and Ronnie Brown Wildcat going.
Exactly. And then I'll go get like one of these massive blocking tight ends later in the draft, and we'll just call
Jackson Hawes.
Dude, I love it. Anyway. But then my receiver room, one of my least favorite positions in football, the wide receiver, is apparently one of my best positions in draft evaluation. So follow me for wide receiver takes. Don't actually do that. But as you can see, I've invested a lot. I have 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick. But it seems to work out. I mean, again, it's kind of playing the value game where I probably wouldn't have drafted this way, like for myself, like as a GM, which is kind of where it gets unrealistic. But I am trying to also win games in this league, which some people don't care about. It's not necessarily a competitive league, but I'm a competitive person and I'm trying to win football games. So needed some good receivers, and I like JSN. I like him as my slot guy. He's not my ex, even though it says that. I'd probably realistically with this team have Neighbors and Franklin on the outside and JSN in the slot. But yeah, so my wide receiver room solid. Jalen Coker was a really fun UDFA hit this year.
Coker UDFA is huge.
Great season. That's again one of those where it's just like, dude, I got that dude as a UDFA, and then coming in and checking his grade every week. This is awesome. And moving on, tight end rooms really just Tucker Kraft. I took a swing on Zach Kuntz, round 6.
I was a big Zach Kuntz guy. I love him.
I just like the upside, and I was sitting there in round 6 like I should probably get a tight end, so I got one. Because I only had Tucker Kraft at the time when he got picked second for the Packers. And so I was like, I have a number 2 tight end and no one else. I know he's a number 2 tight end. I might as well get another one. And look where we are now. But yeah, so Holker, Kraft, Kuntz, again, don't need a tight end. Probably could like some better production there. O-line's a problem. Bo Limmer hopefully keeps that starting spot because he is the only thing holding my O-line together. I don't like that I have Zavala on there because I didn't even like Chandler Zavala's tape. But the Dane Brugler hike, it was my first year doing my shadow team. And I was like, I don't like him. I don't see it. But everyone else seems to like him. Surely I'm missing something. I just threw him on my board. And that was like the first thing that really taught me, like, don't buy into draft type, be confidently wrong, because I'm now stuck with this guy, and I'm sorry if he's listening, but he can't stay healthy. He got replaced by free agents. It's not been a good run for him. But I have him on my team. I didn't really even love him as a prospect, so I bit the bullet on that one. But then I have guys, like Christian Mahogany, who didn't really get run until later on in the season with injuries. But I do think once the Lions start having some turnover in that room, he's going to move his way up. So I'm okay waiting on that one. I'm kind of in the same boat with Crum. I think he's going to find a spot on the Broncos. Just has to wait for some of these older guys to get out of there. Same spot with both the Browns guys, where again, I'm just like, that's a hard offensive line room to break into. So hopefully they make it. Jalen Duncan. This is why I always joke about you with Jalen Duncan, because I'm just like, oh, he could do it. He could do it, right?
I like the pick. The value was there. I like the pick.
It was. I took him at the 7th. Oh, anyway, but that's my offense.
Small spot for both of us, I guess.
Apparently, I'm a wide receiver guru, because I could get first rounders right. But yeah, and then Troy Franklin hurt, but it's okay because if you just flip Troy Franklin and Jalen Coker,
you're fine.
I mean, I'd take Coker for what he did last year in the second. I'm all for that. So anyway, but that's the offense. And then again, just kind of where I'm at. So as far as draft needs go on the offensive side, I'm just going for offensive linemen, and you know me, build for the quarterback, not around the quarterback. We're going to accumulate good football players, and if the quarterback we like falls to us, we'll pick him up. If he doesn't, we'll roll on to year 4 or year 3, season 3, with no quarterback.
Yeah, but you see, your owner would fire you after 3 years.
Hey, but we only have 44 players. So my mindset right now, we don't have to have a quarterback. I have to come out of next draft with an answer at quarterback, or I'm fired. That's like my mindset right now. I just have to come out of the total first 4, my 88 players. If I haven't bitten the bullet and just swung on a quarterback that hit through 88 players, then yes, I deserve to be fired, and hopefully we'll find another job. But that is my mindset. That's why I'm just being patient. through the first 2 years, I'm like, I kind of fell out of drafting range in year one. Last year didn't love anybody. This year don't love anybody. If my guy's there, I'll get him for sure. Maybe I'll end up reaching on him in my mind per my board value. But I'm not really worried because next year's also supposed to be a really loaded quarterback class. So I'm hoping between this year and next year, I can come out with a couple guys that'll at least make Sam Hartman not my QB2. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I? Oh, did you have questions, Drew?
I don't think so. I'm just poking fun at
okay.
Just on my trench options.
Okay. So I have some questions about the rules.
Hit me.
Because when you're developing something or you're programming something, the developers want to know the rules. So I heard you at the beginning say it's 2 draft picks per round for the first 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Did I hear that correct?
Yes, sir.
So there would be an input as to how many draft picks exist per round. Right. And the choices right now, I believe, are either 2 or 1. Right.
Yeah,
Meaning
well,
you get 2
that's
picks
where
per
all
round
depends, but...
or 1. It's an honor system, but the user has to input that before they go into the draft.
Well, that's where like I've always had like the mindset and how I approach it is where it's more about figure out what picks you have. Like go to Tankathon and figure out which picks you have. Just by counting. And then that's why like on this sheet, because this is just what I use to draft is just these boxes, but I input the pick number. And that way it's not like going through every time I do a mock and it's like, oh, okay, I'm looking for the 17th pick, or I know I have 2 picks in this round. Like it's just, I know what picks I have and I can input that and then make that available for me. Like when I've tried to program simulations in like Excel and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I've tried to do where it's like, take my input. And then when we get to that point of the draft, just pause, and that's where I go in, and then carry on until the next time I hit that input.
That's relatively easy, actually, to program.
Yeah,
like that's the easy part. I'm still trying to get to the point where there's inputs before you hit the start draft button.
Mm-hmm.
Before you start the draft, what does the developer need to know? They need to know: are you picking twice per round or 1 time per round?
Yeah.
And are those the only 2 options, or is there the get rich quick scheme where if you need 53 players and there's 7 rounds, if you have 8 picks per round, you have a team after the first year?
This is true. And there's also people that do, once you get through like the 2 picks per round phase, it's a lot of people have had trouble like keeping a team up with just X amount of guys per year, no free agency. So people have like implemented like comp pick formulas of like, oh, if your players do this well, then you can earn extra picks that way. Or again, there's teams that follow trade rules. So like if the team that has my pick in this round trades it, I lose my pick and I just get whatever compensation they got. And so they kind of like mirror it that way. That's where it gets a little funky. But again, where if you're standardizing it, then yes, I mean it's the 2 picks through the first whatever, and then the 1 pick after that.
Okay. And we don't like, as the developer of the website, I don't care what you're doing next year. I only have to care about your as is draft now, because you're just going to take the guys that you draft and you're going to add them to your own spreadsheet. Yeah. But if you had something to help you draft, that could be a place where my site could come in and help.
Yeah, like I've told multiple people, I'm like, if someone can put this together, like I don't know how big like the following is now. I think there's like 60 something people in the community that I built on X. But I'm like, if we could like find ways to like mainstream this, like we've been cutting down on like time to score every year. I've been trying to find ways to at least just run mock drafts for your shadow team so we could post stuff and kind of grow that. But I'm like, I know there's a handful of people that would at least be promoting it, and then it'd be easier to get people to join, which is good and bad. But if it's kind of easier to mainstream and then, be more involved with, as opposed to just listening to me talk about it all the time, which I'll happily do.
Yeah. So here's what I envision, right? And I put some of this in the chat. So my simulator has, single user draft, ranked players, and draft a team. there would be another section for shadow team draft. Right? So it's a completely different section of the site. Okay, so what does that section of the site have? That section of the site has a draft order. It is the same draft order that the other part of the site uses. So that part's the same, but because we have to do this shadow pick thing, I'll make it a different section. When you're in a shadow team draft, there is such a thing as a shadow pick. And the shadow pick is the number that you're showing, the 522, 37, 54 pattern, right? So you have to know you have to be able to input the shadow pick. My shadow number is 5 and 22.
And that's where it's like, yeah, like you can really just have the two columns with that out of do, and you could have two columns to 32. That, like, at least for me, I don't know. There's other people that do their drafts different ways, but like for me, you could just do it 1 through 32. I know my pick range. I roll my die, do my random number generator, and I could just pick the number out of 32 and theoretically in that range that I have selected. And then it could just, I don't know how easy that would be, but then it could just pick that number in each round. And that way it's like, oh, you have the 6th and 18th pick. You have the 8th and 25th pick in each round, whatever that number might be. And that way it's not like going through each round and trying to pick, again, kind of for that team or out of again, the rounds that get to like 50 picks. It's not like, you have the like recycles that number. You can just be out of the top 32.
Right. Because the 5th pick this year is the Jaguars in round 1. I don't know that the Jaguars have the 5th pick of round 2.
They do not.
Who is the 5th pick of round 3. So the key is you're always getting the 5th pick of the round.
Yeah.
Right. And that's already in my database. Right. So like on the draft order I have to load, there's what selection number is it? 1 through 262. What round is it and what pick number in the round? So you're basically just saying that pick number in the round 5 is always the shadow pick. So the simulator makes a pick and then the user makes a shadow pick and then it jumps to number 6.
Exactly.
Right. That I conceptualize in my head, that seems really clear. Right? Where I was going was, well, will there ever be a time where a user is going to say, I want 4 picks in each round? Or are we saying the shadow team steering committee is saying your only 2 choices are 1 pick per round or 2 picks per round?
Well, that's where, again, it's like, I think starting from a base level, it's easiest to go that 1 and 2. But then again, if it catches on and it's worth growing, that's where it's, I think entering in which picks you have would be an easier long-term system just because there's people that there's so many different ways to handle it. So that's where it gets a little complex. But at a base level, like people starting out, they only need the 2. And then once you get to year 5, if you're used to using the system, you switch it to 1. And that's a pretty easy transition. And then it would just be trying to figure out how to handle your extra picks if you have them. Like, I don't even know. I feel like I have to go comp pick because like kind of Velox is saying, a lot of people have figured out that you kind of need those, but I'd like to not. But then it's how do you combat that?
And so I think for this to catch on, you don't want to make it so people have to get a full team in 4 years. This would be my advice to the shadow team community for this to catch on. You want people to be able to do it after 1 year.
For sure.
So there has to be a way to make sure that you get 22 legitimate players after year 1. And whatever convention, that group of 60, whatever people that you have, I would suggest for this to like get a hold, people have to be able to see success after year 1. Like the number of people that would want to keep continuing, if those were their quarterbacks, they would just give up.
Well, that's the thing. It's all about like your intent with it. Like for me, it's all about growing it. Like I plan on it, doing it for a while. Cause like, even like if you're it's in the background, you just draft your players, you throw them in, you evaluate them after the year. Like you're not necessarily looking to compete week to week. But I've even talked to guys like Bill. I think I've convinced Bill to start one, but he's doing it more like expansion team style. And I think that's a quicker way to do it to get people involved, not only because like he's taken X amount of players within a certain criteria from each team, or that's what's available to him. And he's kind of drafting those guys first or picking those guys first to start his expansion team. And then he'll have his first like rookie draft. So it's almost like dynasty fantasy football style where you get to kind of blend current players and bring in rookies. But that's, again, it's more just about what you're going for. Like with me, like I don't care that it takes a while. I don't care that I don't have a quarterback, because the success that not necessarily that I'm looking for is just like, hey, are my first round picks hitting? Are my second round picks hitting? What of my later round picks are hitting and why? Like, is it my guys that I liked? Is it guys that I didn't even know of until they took off? Like, as far as like, it's all about your definitions of success. If you're trying to compete in the league, like in the league, we have it broken out where your first years are all in the same group. Then it's your years 2 and 3 that are all in the same group as far as, they're grouped up in the fantasy league. And then years 4 plus are all together because they have full teams. So once I liken it to high school where it's like you have your freshman year where you don't know what's going on. You have your sophomore and junior year where you feel like you're competitive, but you're not necessarily a big dog yet. And you got your varsity team where it's like the guys that have been doing it since 2012 or 2016 or whenever the oldest team started. And you have guys that are just in their 4th year, like trying to make it to the big leagues. That's where it gets more fun because it's like you see that mix. But again, it's all about what your goal is. Like my goal is not even necessarily to win in that league, though. That's like a secondary goal for me, where it's just I want my team to be good. I just want to see, like, is my draft process good? This is how I evaluate my draft process. It's more of a tool for me, not necessarily like a fantasy team. So again, it's kind of like whatever you're looking for.
So I agree this is a good way for the draft people to figure out how well are they evaluating players, ranking players, and projecting them to the NFL. I don't like the idea of going to existing NFL rosters and then adding them to a shadow team, because you have the it's not guilty. It's you have hindsight working in your favor.
Yeah. And that's why it's like I like the idea of like
this is good. I'll add him to my team. But
I like the idea of like the
him, or Ricky
expansion draft.
I'm not going to add him
because like the NFL, not the NFL, the NHL and the NBA already kind of have that structure in place, so you can kind of pull from that. Like it's happened, and I think everybody talks about like, what if there was a new NFL team? So like I like the concept, but kind of like Vlog said, like I'm trying to like have this. I always joke that it's my resume for when I apply for a GM job. I have my shadow team. I can show you my draft history. I'm not just a takes guy.
No,
but like for me, it's more of like I like that's why I'm doing a salary cap team. It's more of like the realistic simulation for me. So I'm okay with the grind because I'm actually super genuinely curious to see how it develops over time. How does my draft style change? Which players can I look back and like their contract year and be like, oh, I don't even know why I have that guy.
Yeah. So Parker, I want to like piggyback on that because I do think that this is a great way for the draft community to show that they know what they're doing. This really is. So the whole expansion thing can't use existing NFL rosters. You're cherry picking.
Yeah.
Right? Because like when you grab when you grab, what was it, Jonathan Taylor, he could have gone to Kansas City, but he went to Indy instead. Right?
What's the hard part?
You don't
like
know
JSN.
if you're grabbing Jonathan Taylor or Isaiah Pacheco. Mm-hmm. You don't know. Right? Because I think those guys went really close to each other in the same draft, if I remember correctly. So you don't want to cherry pick and pick Taylor when in that draft, that was kind of a toss-up as to who was going to go to which team.
No, I agree for sure.
So you need to add the element of, as the draft is flowing, what's the value on the board? What's the value on my board? That is legit skill. And as you say, that would be a resume that you would hand if you're interviewing. So I would stick it to the draft. And what I would suggest is we brainstorm what is a way that somebody could have a shadow team after 1 year that is legit, so they stick with it. And the reason we want them to stick with it is that means that they keep coming back and using the site.
Yeah, no, and that's that's the best and worst part for me, right? Like that's where like if you look at my team composition, my favorite part about my team is my defense because I have multiple Vikings and Eagles players. Like I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 Vikings players, and then I have 5 Eagles players, but 4 of them are defensive backs. So as much as it's fun to be like, oh, I value DBs like the Eagles do, I also have the entire Eagles defensive back room. So not all of those guys are going to be contributing at all. And so it's like, for me, like, it's funny to see that kind of a line, but then it's also like the landing spot kind of sucks for some of the guys. And like, I said the same thing. Like I took JSN at like the 20 overall.
Drafted Tennessee wide receivers.
That's true. AJ Brown's doing all right though. But I took JSN at 20 overall, and nope, that was for you, buddy. I have Jalen Duncan. Move on. All right.
All right.
No, but I took JSN at 20, and then I see him go to the Seahawks, where I'm like, oh, he's what, day 1, wide receiver 3 at best. Like I have a first round pick now. That's a full-time wide receiver 3. But then like watching him work that up through, like I wouldn't pick that as a good fit for him. But now it looks like he's going to kind of fill in and become the 2, or he's become the 2. That's where it's like the landing spot's not always great, but sometimes it can work out. But then again, yeah, you're cherry picking. Because you're not moving them from a team like an expansion team would. You're like, oh, Saquon, and this obviously isn't a player you'd be able to get an expansion draft, but like a Saquon, I know his usage. I know how the team looks at him. I know how he's going to score. I can just inject that into my team. I don't love that model, but I mean, if that makes it more interesting for you at first, and you can kind of phase those guys out with rookies, I'm all for it. Whatever gets you involved. I personally kind of like the grind, and it kind of sucks. Like Vlog said, like I'm drafting guys, and it's like my year 1's tough because you're like really hoping that someone can just get some snaps so they can get a PFF grade that's worth looking at. I mean, outside of obviously I had Bijan year 1, so that was fun to watch, but it's like he did what I expected him to do. But again, it's like fun for me. Like I track the averages. I'm like, oh, this guy's like picking up steam. Or like I talked about, I did my weekly show during the season on YouTube. Like I talked about, oh, this player got reps this week. Oh, this player got reps this week again. Like I can kind of see him ramp up and take over some spots, whether it's due to injury or whatnot. But like it's fun to go through that week by week for me. But I'm also a sicko where I'm like, I'm gonna follow this every week. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna update the data every week. I score every week. Like I'm in it. But like I get that people don't want to do that. But it's also, again, there's varying degrees of involvement. That's where I think, again, the degree of success is all about just what your end goal is. If you're trying to evaluate your draft process year over year, this is a great way to do it. And you don't have to worry about any of the other data unless you're tracking it as far as like what's a hit.
Yeah, I think Velox, his last comment kind of hit the nail on the head for what my suggestion was going to be. Now, as far as like straight year 1, immediately having a productive team, this may not be the best thing. But as far as just like an entry barrier, like having a playable team, your first one is do your typical, your 2 rounds through day 1 and day 2, and maybe even day 3, but just like not have a cap on UDFAs. To just be able to sign enough UDFAs to fill out a full 53-man. Or like, I think he said 3.
Like I said, I've seen people do that.
3 days. Yeah. Again, you probably, filling out a whole roster with UDFAs, you probably will have a productive team, or like guys, even, a starting 22 that are all going to get snaps or enough to get a PFF grade, but you're going to have at least a fieldable team.
I got to shout out my guy, OH Clone, on that topic, because he has his team, but he also has a UDFA team. He has a team that he has only built out with UDFAs. And like kind of like you said, it's like it's not fun watching. Like I don't check on it every week, like throughout the season. But it's fun like recognizing names that are on that team and then coming in at the end of the year and just going through the list and being like, oh, so I have so and so. Oh, this guy I picked this guy up in UDFA, or like I have this guy as my starting cornerback on my UDFA team, but he's actually doing something. Like the Ivan Paces of the world, like Jalen Cokers are really fun for that team because it's like, oh wow, this guy's like doing something. So, but again, it's all about like he's just doing that for fun to see what happens with it and how he's evaluating the back end talent. And that's where I think, again, if you're trying to, like you said, if you're trying to get like a fieldable team, you can up your picks. I do think keeping it to 2 in the first 3 rounds is the best way. I feel like
for sure
if you're coming out with like 5 guys in each of those rounds or whatever, like some crazy number, that's just not as fun to compare your team to other teams, because then it's like, I mean, if you're doing that, if you're just doing it for you, then go ahead. Like I don't care. But yeah, if you're doing that for like comparing it to other teams, you're like, oh well, I'm the best. But it's like you had 5 shots in the first round. Like I would hope that you hit at least a couple of those. You had 15 shots on the first 2 days. Like I'd hope you're bringing in a couple of those. But that's where again I love, ramp up your picks in the later rounds, open end your UDFAs. Like I'm all for that because that still shows that still like adds the challenge in my opinion of like you still have to hit on some late round guys, and if they slide, they slide. That's not on you. That's on the draft. So I'm all for it. But I just you got to limit the day 1 and 2 picks in my opinion.
So I think the math that we were dealing with in the chat was very similar to what you just said. So you get 2 picks per round, right? Which is what you started the podcast with an hour ago.
Yep.
Right. And then rounds 3 through 7, you get 2 comp picks your first 3 years.
So you get like an extra 2 picks? Or
you will get an extra 2 picks in rounds 3 through 7, which are also the comp pick rounds for the NFL.
Yep.
Right? Yep. And then that would give you 22 players at the end of year 1. And then you do that year 2, you do that year 3, you're up to 66 players.
And that's where I'm just
UDFA.
And that's where, I've just taken those 8 picks and I've slid them to my UDFA spot. And then that's the challenge for me is, again, I just don't want to be able to scoop in all the UDFAs and by the end of camp see who burst out. Like I just want to – that's where I'm just restricting myself purely on my own volition. But I think switching those 8 picks to the other rounds I think is fine, especially if you limit it to like 8 picks spread out throughout day 3 instead of even including the 3rd round and keep 1 and 2 clean, have 6 players come out of it. And then you have those extra free comp picks, in day 3 where you can get all the day 3 shots you want. If you hit them, more power to you. And then you have open-ended UDFA free agency.
Well, and ultimately, this is my opinion, and this is solely my opinion. So for anybody that's a draft professor, you have heard me say, tell me the players you have at position X in your top 175.
Yep.
Right? Top 175 is rounds 5 and higher. Okay. So the reason that threshold exists, if you've done 32 GM mock drafts before, usually in round 6 and 7, I'm picking between 160 and 200 on my board. Meaning that I don't need to go to player 262 when I'm in the 7th round. I may not even have hit player 200 yet, right? Just because the volatility of boards, like if I was going to compare Parker's board with Drew's board, your top 100 is probably 85% alike. You may have 15 different players in your top 100. Maybe. But if we were to go to the top 125, I bet you have, like 95 of those players the same or 105 of those players the same. But by the time you get to the top 175, there's going to be a lot of differences. Mm-hmm. So the volatility of the round 4 and 5 grades, that's the difference between the Howie Roseman and the Trent Baalkes.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
I actually just pulled up my board from last year because I wanted to see. I was like, because I was thinking about it, and I'm like, I feel like I'm always drafting out of my top 100. Like, I feel like that just going to that 175, like you said, provides so much like variability. But then I was like, I wonder, like, as far as like my UDFA guys, like, I wonder how highly rated I had my UDFAs. And so I pulled it just up my board from last year. And so I always go just my top ranked UDFAs. And so Frank Crum was my top ranked UDFA, which is why he was my first pick as a UDFA last year. And I had him at 104. So I got a player 4 spots outside of my top 100 as a UDFA. And so it's like I always build out my board to be around 254 minimum. Like that's my goal number. I always say 300 and end up around there. But that 250 mark is always the key for me because I'm going to be drafting. Like if every single player goes where I value them, there's like 252 to 256 picks every year. And so that 254 range means that I can get through the whole draft. I might not have any UDFAs left. That's why I need to go a little over. But if everyone's valued how I value them, then I need that many people on my board. But at the end of the year, like my board really opened up, let's see, around like 228 is where there wasn't like just groups of guys taken. But I mean, like I said, I had 104 available. My next available, I had 115 and 116. Jalen Coker was 119 on my board. I had Leonard Taylor at 136 who was available. But that's like I'm saying, like I love that you do the 175 because top 100 is so like I feel like easy and people are like sliding guys into the back end of it. But that 175, I think you can draft out of a 175 personally.
Yeah, and I also think like we can even probably do a draft professor, let's say contest. Everybody show your top 175, and there's a lot of people that like to say like this person got 90% of the top 100 right.
I definitely do that.
Right. And I've heard other people say like you should follow this person, Jim, because he gets 90 of the top 100 right. Okay, like most people, and like I'm not even watching tape, right? I'm just listening to all you guys and trying to figure out like where players are valued and stuff, right? That's how I figure it all out. It's reading and listening. And with me reading and listening, I'm going to be able to get 75 of the top 100 right. I might even be able to do better than that. So you don't learn a lot at the top 100. That's my point, is that the deviations aren't there. The deviations are going to come in rounds 4 and 5. And
that's where it's.
I didn't hear you.
Oh, I just said I agree. I think that's.
Oh, okay.
You hit the nail on the head right there.
Yep. So, hey, so we should pause for station identification. Drew, you want to tell everybody who you are and how they can find you?
For sure. Yeah. I'm Drew, or at Iron City Film on Twitter or X, which is where I post pretty much all of my cut-ups and scouting breakdowns and stuff, because I'm finally starting to get my board a little bit together. I'm making progress. I think really I got a late start this year too, which is part of the problem, but I kind of felt like I pulled myself in too many different directions. Like I've got 1 or 2 games watched on a ton of guys, but I never actually got enough finalized grades to put something together. So I'm finally getting more disciplined about that. I'm starting to get a board together. But yeah, I do most of my stuff on my Twitter or X. I do a lot of stuff here on Draft Professor. That's kind of my main thing. So yeah, I'm here every Tuesday night with Parker. I'm gonna be here on this Thursday talking about tight ends. Thursday night, that's gonna be a fun episode. And next, I've had to hold my tongue this far, but I'm gonna go ahead and plug it. Me and Parker's podcast next week is probably one that I'm the most excited about. I cannot wait to talk about our O-line big boards all the way through. That's going to be an awesome conversation, so be sure to tune in for that next week. But yeah, just mainly on Twitter and here for me.
Yep, and Parker.
Yeah, got into a lot of film today. We got me amped up. I was like really going in and finalizing some profiles. This show next week is going to be a beast. I'm pumped.
Can't wait.
But yeah, you can find me on X at ParkerBlake60. That's where everything of mine is. I post my YouTube links there. I don't know how to plug my channel. I'm probably going to change the name of it 4 more times before I figure out one that I actually like. So I'm trying not to. I'm on the Tic Tac machine, but I don't know how that works either. So just go find me on Twitter. Everything's there. Hit me up my DMs if you have questions or any other content that I do. I'll point you the right direction, but I haven't got it ironed out yet. So I'm just on X. You can catch me there ranting about shadow teams. Since I have the stats in front of me, I'm trying to convert my X to more a draft focus. I was a Bengals guy for a while. But I really love player evaluation. I really love the draft. And so I'm trying to go more draft based, and I have subscriptions available on my X. That's where I post my big boards as I update them. So as I wrap up this round of offensive line review, I'll post my fully updated offensive line big board for my subscribers. So you can go and check it out along with any of the other positions and all that stuff as I update it. I don't just do it like periodically throughout the year as my top 50, my top 100. I just say, hey, I watched this position today, and I post a screenshot of my current board. So you can see where they lay out. I do it while I do summer scouting. I do it while I do in-season reviews and checks, and I do it with the final stuff before it gets posted. And I post my full draft board for my subscribers, not just my top 100 like I do on my regular feed. But since I have them in front of me, out of my top 32 players on my board last year, 22 went in the top 32. 75 of my top 100 went in the top 100. And if you want to see who was missing and who I had rated higher or lower, you should follow me and you can find out. but out of my board of 261 players, 208 of them got drafted. I feel like it's a pretty good number. So go find me on X, ParkerBlake60, or here with Draft Professors, now talking offensive line and not DBs because I paid my dues and I've earned it. Thank you, Jim.
There we go.
Yeah, well, you never know. Next week might be the last offensive line episode because Drew wants to do running backs the week after.
Well, I'm always down to talk about the trench guys. I just finished up Caleb Johnson, so it was on the brain. But honestly, I'm here to talk about whatever position.
I just feel like I haven't talked like actual O-line talk outside of like our last couple of shows with anybody like in general. Like if people have asked me my takes on like the same 5 guys, I'm like, no, dude, let me talk to you about this guy in the 4th round because I love him. He's awesome. But no one wants to have those conversations.
We can sit here and talk offensive line for the next 2 months until the draft.
Yeah, I'll be here for it. Right here.
Yeah, so next Tuesday is an offensive line bonanza.
We might need 3 hours for that one.
Because Drew and Parker are going to be going over every offensive line position that they have in their top 175. So all the centers, all the guards, all the tackles. They
might have 2 centers in there.
They're all the same. They can all play everything.
Yeah. So
but as far as like true centers go, I might actually only have 1 in that whole thing. I got to be honest, maybe 2.
And his name's Willie.
So give the channel a follow at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. The subscriptions on YouTube are really important for the channel. So if you could subscribe to the channel, that is appreciated. We do 32 GM mock drafts every Friday, and that's about to expand to Saturdays and Sundays in March as well. So if you like talking about the draft, we will be talking about the top 100 players over and over and over again every weekend leading up to the draft with different people emceeing the 32 GM mocks.
We got a big one this Friday.
Yeah. So Velox and there was one other that was here, Exploring with KJ. If either of you guys would be interested in participating in the 32 GM mock, please kind of reach out to at NFL Draft Fanatic on X. No, I am Fanatic. And my pinned post has the info for the 32 GM mocks. So it's going to be a big one on Friday. We're doing it with NBS Media. Most of the teams are already taken. I think there's only 6 teams left. So we've done a good job of filling the spots. But daily draft content, as Drew said, there's a tight end show on Thursday. Tomorrow's Wednesday. We're doing pass rushing defensive tackles, run stopping defensive tackles, and we're doing linebackers. So we've got a couple different shows coming at you. But we've been going here for the better part of an hour and a half. So thank you, everybody, for following. Parker, thanks for the intro to Shadow Teams. I learned a lot. Like, I know how to program this onto my site now.
For sure.
Thanks to this podcast. So thank you very much. So for Parker, for Drew, for myself, for the 37 podcasters at the Draft Professor, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow.
And bring your popcorn next week.
Oh, yeah.
Get your popcorn ready.